Hi students, and welcome to the last week of this course in which we're taking a step out of Western Europe, at least in the beginning, and we're going to look at changes that are taking place in the Middle East and even further east in Asia that are part of the end of the period of the Middle Ages, especially in the Middle East and in the Islamic world. Remember, we've talked about this society as being comprised of these three different civilizations. The Byzantine Empire, which is now very weak after the Fourth Crusade, Western Europe, which is an emerging and new civilization after the fall of Rome, and then the other new civilization, the emergence of Islam in the Middle East and in North Africa. And that's the civilization which actually is going to change most quickly, or is going to change first, although it doesn't change necessarily immediately fundamentally. And so we begin by looking at the Mongols. And so I'm going to take you deep into the Eurasian steppe, deep into in the interior of Asia, an area that even still today, in this era of intercommunication, is one of the most remote places in the world. It is the site of some of the most bitter winters on the planet. From November to March, temperatures regularly descend below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And the inhabitants have been, for many, many centuries, a nomadic people who graze their livestock on the steppe and who keep themselves warm by lining the tents with the pelts of their animals, with the animals they hunted or the animals that they farmed, and then burning animal droppings. This steppe is barren enough, as you can see a little bit from the picture here. There's very little or very few trees or wood to burn, and so animal fodder is what's used to burn fires inside the tents to keep them warm. And they live in tribal groups. And the tribal groups, of course, feud among one another, and the neighboring Chinese had recognized that change had often come to China from these tribes in the north moving south into China. And so they had encouraged these tribes to feud with one another. They had encouraged and promoted these feuds in order to promote stability for China itself. During the period from 900 to 1200, however, the globe experienced a widespread rise in temperatures, including Mongolia, and this is called the medieval warming period. This means that more Mongolian children and animals survived to adulthood, and those that did so were larger and more powerful. And so it was not difficult to recognize that if someone was able to unite all these tribes, they could become quite powerful and quite dangerous and exercise significant change. But no one thought that the significant change would span most of the Eurasian continent. No one thought that this power would encompass the largest land empire the world has ever known. Around 1162, that leader was born, and his name when he was born was Temujin. That's Temujin. And his early life was very difficult. His father died and he became an outcast. So kind of like those medieval kings that we were studying last week, or a number of those medieval kings. They grow up only having briefly known their fathers. Nevertheless, by 1206, so when he was in his 40s, Temujin is able to unite the tribe and he takes the title Genghis Khan. Khan, an ancient title meaning emperor. Genghis Khan will go on to build one of the most sophisticated military machines in the history of the world. And so we're going to look at the successes of the Mongol army, and in order to do that, we want to understand why this army was so successful. Why was it able to defeat almost any force that opposed it? So the answers are, firstly, that it was a meritocratic army. Your position in this army, your authority in this army, was based purely on your ability, not based on your birth or your rank, and so it was an army that was exceptionally loyal. It was an army that was highly mobile. So remember that the Mongols, if you go far enough back, have been nomads. They maintain some of this nomadic lifestyle in their military campaigning. This means that Each warrior has 5 different horses that are running alongside, and he'll switch from one horse to another during the day. This will mean that he's always riding a fresh horse. It means that they can cover distances at great speed and often arrive and surprise their enemies by the speed of their arrival. That contributes to their terrifying reputation. Along with the multiple horses running alongside the army on the march would be multiple different animals, cattle and pigs. And so the Mongol army not only moves quickly because of its use of horses, but also because it has a mobile food supply. And so this enabled the Mongol army to move very quickly. It was technologically a very advanced army. The Chinese started to develop gunpowder at this point, early prototypes. They developed great siege weapons, and the Mongols, once they start to move into China, they start to take on and adopt these weapons. And whereas the Chinese had adopted a more isolationist approach, the Mongols are going to take these weapons and they're going to use them to build a giant empire. And so, whereas a few weeks back, we looked at the rise of Islam, and we looked at how a lot of the early Muslim armies shared some of these characteristics. They were very loyal. They were bound together by this new religion. They were highly mobile. They made use of the desert, but they were not technologically advanced. And that really hampered them. They weren't able to conduct many successful sieges of big cities like Constantinople. The Mongols are different. The Mongols are technologically advanced, and we're going to see they are going to be successful at siege warfare as well as being devastatingly mobile out in the open. Lastly, the Mongols were psychologically terrifying. Although we've seen that armies across the Middle Ages sacked cities, and people died, buildings, possessions were destroyed and seized, and this was considered part of warfare. It was part of the risk that a city took by resisting an invader. The Mongols appear to have been especially thorough, and on such a regular basis that we start to wonder how much of these accounts actually are hyperbole and how much are true. And we're told that when the Mongols arrived at a city, they would beat these enormous drums, and it took 4 men to carry these drums, and the sound of the drums would send people in the cities almost mad with fear. And that because they knew that the Mongols were going to win, and when they won, they would enter the city and they would destroy everything in their path, even down to cats and dogs. And we have accounts of the streets being slick with human fat and with the remains of the humans and animals that the Mongols had killed. And so this means that more cities are willing just to make terms with Genghis Khan or to surrender to his army, even without fighting. And so this highly successful army is the premise for the Mongols' construction of this great empire. So how does this mighty military machine become part of the story of the Middle Ages? Genghis Khan is going to first take this army south into China, which at the time was divided into different regional dynasties. So there's no unified ruler of China. In 1215, the Mongols capture Beijing and sack the city for a month. And Genghis Khan, we assume, probably planned to continue to march further into China. But there was a rebellion back home. Mongols were not used to being ruled by a single ruler, and they take advantage of Genghis Khan being away. Some of the other old tribal leaders want their independence back, and so Genghis has to go back to punish them. With Genghis on the way, the rebels lose their nerve and they flee. And so Genghis pursues them. He pursues them, these rebels who are fleeing west across the Asian steppe. And the rebels flee into the Khwarezmian Empire. Khwarezmian Empire, which is on the edge of Persia, which you can see here, Bukhara and Ghazni. So Genghis arrives here. And here's where we learn something else about Genghis. He's not just a military leader. He's someone who has a capacity for trade and business and recognizing trading and business opportunities. And so he recognized the wealth of the Khwarezmian Empire, and he sent a delegation to the Sultan, suggesting the creation of a trading partnership. To the trading sultan and to the Persian sultan, this was considered kind of ridiculous. These Mongols were just scruffy people from the wastelands and the steppe. What could they have to trade? And so they humiliate the ambassador. Accounts vary. They either shaved him or they cut off his head. for Mongols, it's basically the same thing. The moustache is extremely important. And so Genghis unleashes a campaign of terror that destroyed this empire. 1 million men, women, and children were killed, and this area of Central Asia has never recovered. So we're talking about modern-day Afghanistan and northern Pakistan, that area that at the time, Genghis Khan recognized that this was a wealthy empire. No one considers this a wealthy area of the planet anymore. And the campaign of Genghis Khan is the beginnings of this change. And so this gives you a sense of the long-standing legacy that the Mongols are going to leave Western civilization. That the devastation of the Mongol campaigns, the creation of this empire, but we'll start with the devastation, is going to have real significant impact on the regions of Central Asia and the Middle East, who are going to bear the brunt of this terrifying and highly effective army. Genghis died in 1227. He was succeeded by his son Ogedei. Ogedei continues to take the Mongol military machine forward over Central Asia, over modern-day Russia, capturing many cities in modern-day Russia, and then into Europe. And captured the cities of Kiev, and reached Poland and Hungary, and as far west as Croatia. And no one seemed to be able to stop them. And we know that the Pope at the time, Innocent IV, was calling for crusades and was calling for Christians in Europe to pray that the attacks of the Mongols would somehow be turned back, because no one seemed to be able to defeat them. In the end, Ogedei dies. Ogedei dies in 1241, and against the advice of the leading generals of the Mongols, who said, "Come on, we can go forward, we can conquer further. No one is stopping us in Europe." The Mongols returned to Mongolia to elect a new Khan. This northern prong of the Mongol invasions was never resumed, and medieval Europe was spared, or at least Western medieval Europe was spared these devastating invasions that were going to devastate Central Asia and the Middle East.